I'm on. It's much better if you join me up here, really. This is an intimate group, and if you're able to climb the stairs, I encourage you to come upstairs with me. All right. Thanks for staying. Good to see you.
Michelle Horsley needs no introduction.
Well, thanks for joining me. Can people downstairs hear okay? Great, awesome. So, I'm so pleased that so many of you are able to stay after worship today. You are prolonging your lunch to hang out with me and hear me talk about music. So I feel very honored. Thank you for staying, and thank you, Mark, for the invitation to speak for you, and to Linda, or Martha, I think was the one who emailed me. So thank you to those who coordinate this. I'm so pleased to be a part of this again. In the spring, I gave a talk when we were all on Zoom about spirituals, and this is going to be a very different talk. And it's in person, so I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be talking in person with you. If I am speaking too quickly, just raise your hand and I'll slow down. Thank you. I will slow down my speaking. So many of you know me as the music director here. You've seen me conducting the choristers and the adult choir, and last year we had all the virtual choir things and drone footage and recordings with leaf blowers and all kinds of Zoom failures, and it's really interesting to think that all of that was just a year ago, that happened, all of that happened. Anyway, you know some things about me, and I know relatively little about you. So I hope we can remedy that. And here I am about to talk about myself some more, but also, more importantly, music. So, do we have, just out of curiosity, anybody in the house who knows their Myers-Briggs type? Yes? Ooh, we've got some folks. I am an ESTJ, which means that I speak, apparently, according to the system, with extroverted thinking, and then I listen with introverted sensing, which means that as I'm listening, I'm thinking experientially. I'm going back into my memories. And when I speak, it's this angular bullet point sort of list-making thing that is very unromantic. So when I'm taking an input and relating it to my own experiences, I find that this is something that is a form of empathy, and it is a form of sharing of our own storytelling that really connects us to a lot of things. So I'll be sharing some things about music, certainly, that are a bit heady and academic. We'll be referencing some parts of a fugue, for example, and little motivic things. And you who have not gone to music school may think, oh my gosh, this is really, a bit much. But we're also going to be talking about personal stories that I have to some pieces, and I think stories are things that we can all hopefully relate to. So I hope to convey both of those. I'm going to share things about 3 composers. Those 3 composers are Maurice Duraflay. Anybody heard of him? Hey. Olivier Messian. Anybody heard of him? Alan, Peter, Mark, got some takers, yep. And Johann Sebastian Bach. Anybody heard of him? We're going to start with Duraflay. Duraflay was a French composer in the 1900s, 1902 to 1986. He studied with Charles Tournemire at the Paris Conservatory. Other students there were basically every famous French composer of organ that you can think of. I know you all think about many French organ composers all the time, but Dupré, Alain, Langlais, Boulanger, Milhaud, Gigoux, they all studied at the Paris Conservatory. And Tournemire, who taught Duraflay, was very famous for writing this big magnum opus called L'Orgue Mystique. The mystical organ would be the translation of that, of course. And it is basically a set of pieces for every single Sunday in the entire liturgical year. Multi-movement pieces for every Sunday, which is really huge. Duraflay is one of those composers that wrote very little, and everything he wrote was gold, because it didn't come easy for him. I've always had a hard time relating to composers like Mozart, for example, who just, walked outside and an entire concerto just appeared to them, those sorts of geniuses. I find it much more relatable to think of composers for whom composing was very difficult. Duraflay is considered one of the greatest composers by many, many musicians of organ music, of symphonic music, of choral music. If anybody knows of the Duraflay Requiem, which is just absolutely exquisite. He only wrote 14 pieces of music. That's it. In his entire life, he wrote 14 pieces of music. Some of them are very large, but still 14 pieces of music. You think about the amount of music that Bach wrote, or Langlais, or Chopin, or anyone. I mean, it's a very small opus. It's a very small kind of body of work that he wrote. And he painstakingly edited everything, just over and over again, and revision after revision, just making sure that every single note was super intentional. And I find there's something simultaneously sacrificial and luxurious about that, to be able to take that much time to really edit. Is such a sacrifice and also a luxury. I don't know, that might be weird for some people, but I find that is the case. The first piece I learned of his was the toccata, the variations in toccata on Veni Creator that I learned in high school. But then when I got to college, I studied this piece, which is the Prelude Fugue on Alain. Alain was another French composer, Jean Alain. A-L-A-I-N is how you spell his last name. I do not speak French fluently, so pardon my pronunciation. What Duraflay did with his name, to write a prelude and fugue on his name, was something that maybe some of you have heard of before, where they take the letters of the name and they chart it out and relate it to notes on a keyboard, right? So obviously we have A's. That's an A. Do we have an L on the keyboard? No, we don't have an L. So you just make a chart and you go from A to G, and then H through whatever it is, N, and then O through, and you just relate which one corresponds to. So basically, Allah ended up being A, D, A, F. That's someone's name. That's someone's name in musical notes. And all of your names can also be combinations of notes on a keyboard. So this is pretty, a pretty simple concept for symbolizing someone and honoring who they are as a composer. And what he did with this fugue and this prelude, the prelude starts out very fast. Oh my gosh, this speech, it tortured me in undergrad. But you can hear the fugue subject. There it is right there, but it's ornamental, and it's just a flurry of notes very fast. And he weaves this name in a bunch of different places in this prelude. It's really more of a toccata. And then when the fugue comes in, 7 minutes later, ooh, there's something up with that. That second voice is called an answer. So the sort of melody of the fugue is called a fugue subject, and then what responds is the answer, which is the pitches, the relationship of the pitches is the same, but in a different key area. So the subject, A-L-A-I-N, and then the answer, right? And this weaves in and out, and the piece is just so glorious. I'm referencing these pieces, but I don't have time to play them for you because each one is like 15 minutes long. But I had such a formative time with this piece of music, and then many years later, I got to go to France with an organ studio in my master's program, and we got to visit not only Duraflay's church, but also his apartment. There is an organist there, Frederick Blanc, who basically lives Duraflay's life. He was a student of Duraflay's wife for many years, then he kind of inherited their apartment as well as the church position that Duraflay had, and he has not changed anything. We walked into Duraflay's apartment, a very modest little place, and there's Duraflay's home organ that he practiced on, and there's all of the manuscript paper with his handwriting on them, kind of everywhere, kind of sort of spread out on pianos and desks, and he hasn't even dusted. It's the exact same apartment. It has not changed at all. And there was something so sacred about that for me as an organist, to visit this place and to hear about this man who's living Duraflay's life, and what an incredible testament that is. And I just kept on thinking about all of the countless hours that Duraflay has spent revising and revising and revising in this very same place with these very few pieces of music, but these exquisite gems of music. And then we walked outside of his apartment, and there was a modest little balcony, and from the balcony you could see the Eiffel Tower and a bunch of beautiful church spires, including the Church of Duraflay's. And the balcony had all of these little pebbles. You're wondering where the pebble came from. This is the pebble. All thousands and thousands of pebbles that we're just stepping on. And I kept thinking about the few pieces that he worked on and the myriad of pebbles and what they represent. And it just felt like this weird symbolic thing for me at the time, so I stole one. I stole a pebble from Duraflay's balcony, and I still have it. And I treasure this pebble for what it represents to me. And I don't know, when I find myself perseverating on something and pulling a Duraflay, I think back on this pebble and this time, and it brings me great hope. I don't need to tell you how important Bach was to the world of music. Bach was pretty darn important. He wrote a lot of music for a lot of different instruments. He is, as many musicians see it, the epitome of creative expression and compositional prowess. We could chat for hours about his contributions to music history, but I'm going to spare you that and just tell you a little bit about what Bach means to me and a piece of his that I think is very clever. Another piece that is very important to me is the Prelude and Fugue on Saint Anne. Saint Anne is a hymn tune. It's not the lyrics of the hymn, but it is the hymn tune. Do we all know what that means? So hymns will have titles as they are printed in the bulletin, which are often the first line of lyrics, but they also have hymn tune names, and there'll be, things that relate to saints or some book that they came from hundreds and hundreds of years ago or that sort of thing. So the hymn tune name is Saint Anne, but you know it as, "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come." Does everybody know that hymn? Yeah, we all know that hymn. We sing that a lot. Matter of fact, we sang it just a few weeks ago, if I remember correctly. So Bach had different periods of his life, different sort of artistic periods. You know how Picasso had the blue period. The last part of his life, the mature master period of his life, what we call it, is when he wrote the Prelude and Fugue on Saint Anne. And so this made it into one of his Clavier Ubungen. It's a good German word for you. Keyboard praxes is what these are called, and there were 3 of them, these collections of all of these works. And the last one, the one that this Prelude and Fugue came in, was from the 3rd, and it was nicknamed the German Organ Mass. We think of preludes and fugues as close together, but in this set, the prelude happened first, and then there were 9 chorale settings, then the Catechism of 12 chorales, and then a bunch of duets, and then the fugue. So there are a bunch of different pieces in between, which is why this is one of the few sets of preludes and fugues that are academically correct, I guess you can say, to play on a program as just the prelude or just the fugue, or to put the prelude at the top of the program and then have a bunch of pieces in between and then end with the fugue. It's historically okay to do that with this piece. Typically for preludes and fugues, you play them together. It is so abundantly symbolic that it's almost comical. This is an homage that he made to the Trinity, and I think it's especially appropriate to talk about it here, as we are Trinity Episcopal Church. This piece is so Trinitarian, it's ridiculous. So there are 3 sections between the prelude and the fugue in the Clavier Ubungen. There are 27 works in all in this particular book, which of course is 3 times 3 times 3. And the Prelude and Fugue is in the key of E flat, which has 3 flats. The fugue is a 6-part triple fugue, 3 parts doubled up. That means something to musicians. And we understand both of these pieces in 3 sections. There's kind of 3 sections to each, the prelude and the fugue. And each one of these sections has a Trinitarian theme. We understand the first theme as being the Father, and then the second as being the Son, and the third as being the Holy Spirit. It's really fascinating. Just bear with me for a couple minutes here. I think you're going to really love it. So it opens with this, the Father theme, which is like a French overture. It's very royal and declamatory, and it sounds something like this. You get the point. The Father. And then the Son comes in, and it's the only one that doesn't have a pedal part, interestingly. Let me see what I can do. So the Father theme ends. And here's the Son. So it switches in between kind of major and minor tonalities for part of this. A lot of historians like to theorize that this represents this kind of duality of the Son as being on earth and also in heaven, that there's this kind of contentiousness, this poling of being on earth but then also being heavenly, and kind of what that means. No other theme really has this kind of battle between it, within it. And then the Spirit could not be more spirit-like. It is, it sounds like this. Here's the end of the Father theme as it comes back. Tongues of fire, right? Tongues of fire. Oh my gosh, suddenly all of these 16th notes. This is definitely the Spirit working, right? It's very clever. And in the fugue, again, we've got these themes. The main theme of the fugue is, of course, the tune on St. Anne, the melody of that hymn. God, I have in ages. And there's the answer. Here it comes again. And it grows, and then here the pedal comes in. Yeah, there it is. Again, and then of course we've got the Sun theme is I got it written out over here. Also, again, fighting. Where is it? Gosh, these scores are endless. Yeah. But now we've got the Father's theme, the hymn melody, with it. So you can hear it. It's hidden in there. It's there, I promise you. All of these things, and also, counting 3 times 3 times 3, and knowing that it's a triple fugue, and all these sorts of things, you wouldn't hear these if you were just listening. Even the best musician might not hear these things. They were so intentional and so subtle, and you really have to pick apart the entire piece to see the degree to which Bach created all of this and had it be so intentional. And then the third part of the 3-part fugue, the Holy Spirit comes out, and it sounds like this. It's a dance. Oh, I need some stops on, don't I? So here's getting into it. This is also a fugue. there's the melody again. So it's this incredible layering. It's all of this really interesting layering. I see some of your eyes are glazing over. I'm sure you're very, very hungry. I'll get through this as quickly as possible, but it's really cool stuff. If you don't believe me, ask any organist. I promise you, it is very, very cool. I got a chance to study in Germany when I was 20. I did a semester abroad in Baden-Württemberg in a town called Freiburg. Has anybody ever heard of Freiburg? Have we gone to Germany? Has anybody visited Germany? Hands? Yeah, okay. Such a beautiful country. I got fascinated with the German language in undergrad, and I visited and got the real honor to study there. But they have summer and winter semesters, or at least they did when I was there, instead of fall and spring semesters. So after I finished my fall semester, I had time to kill. So I took as many weddings and students and anything I possibly could back at home, and I saved up a little bit of money, and I flew out 33 days before my classes began, and for 33 days I hitchhiked and couch surfed by myself. And it was a really formative time for me. I was 20 years old. And one of the things I was adamant about was to get to Bach's churches. He had 2 of them in Leipzig on this journey. And I was, very immature in many ways and just trying to get by with the least amount of money and taking rides from whoever would give them to me. And I'm amazed that something serious didn't happen to me, but I did survive. And I made it to Leipzig at 6 o'clock in the morning on a random Sunday, and in February, and it was so cold, and I was so delirious. I was wearing clothes that I'd probably been wearing for 3 or 4 days, and I hadn't eaten anything the night before. And I'm running up to random strangers, and I'm asking them, "Where's Bach's church? Where's Bach's church?" in German. And they're all answering, "Oh, that way, that way." Well, there's 2 of them, And I finally made it to, there were 2 churches, the Nikolaikirche and the Thomaskirche, the St. Thomas Church and the St. Nicholas Church. And also I find that relatable, that to know that Bach also scrambled on a Sunday morning. As a person who is doing a lot of scrambling on Sunday mornings by nature of my profession, it's cool to know that Bach also scrambled. I found myself in the pews of these churches, and even though I couldn't really understand the Mass at that point in time, my German was not that good yet, I could understand the Mass, right? Have we been to Masses in other countries and other languages, and even though you're not understanding all the words, you know what's happening. And I just sat there and I melted in the pews. It was so beautiful, and the organs, oh gosh, it was just such a phenomenal experience for me to be there that Sunday morning. And I went to one service, and as one service ended, the other service began, so I scrambled to the next church and made it for that service too. And afterwards, I bought a rose from a florist nearby, and I laid it at his grave, and I was thinking about how all of the beautiful little layers of this rose made the beauty of the rose. And I also bought a sandwich from a cafe, and I kept thinking how sandwiches are nothing if not layers, and all of the layers of Bach's works, and I was eating it on good German Brot, and I just sat there in this little park in between his 2 churches, and I'm sure this park also existed when he was there. It was a very ancient park with very ancient statues, and I kept thinking, this is probably also where Bach ate snacks. So I'm eating a snack in the same place that he did, and I'm eating this snack that is made up of layers, and I'm about to give him something that is made up of layers, and all of this symbolism kind of just overwhelmed me, and I was just very taken by this moment, and I always think of that when I play Bach, actually, to this day. The third composer I want to talk about briefly is Olivier Messian. He was another French composer. I think he's kind of an oyster in terms of composers. He's a bit of an acquired taste. Modern composer now, many hundreds of years later. And I had never heard of him until college. My organ professor gave me a little piece of his from the Nativity suite that he wrote, which if you come to Compline tonight, which you should, it's going to be really, really good, you'll hear this piece there as well. But he wrote a suite of pieces called the Nativity, and in it are all of these movements that have to do with the story of Christ's birth. And one of them is called Lesberge the Shepherds, and it's supposed to represent these shepherds traveling in ancient lands in darkness in the desert, trying to find where they should go. And it sounds a little like this. Can you hear the crunch of footsteps? Can you hear that? Can you hear the sort of wandering? Then we've got, some call this the Star Motif that gets us into the next section. Excuse me. Now, Messian hated jazz. He called it the devil's music, which is why it's really funny that the next thing in this piece sounds like this. There we go. There we go. Like a jazzy clarinet line, isn't it? It's kind of floating around. There's a lot of wandering that happens in this one, and it's kind of from a different world. We're not really understanding tonally what key this is in, kind of the rhythmic pulse of this. It just is. It's from some other place. And Messian did this sort of thing a lot. He didn't write in keys like F major or C minor. He wrote in what he called modes of limited transposition, which were different arrays of notes that had very specific relationships from one another, and if you transposed them, they only transposed up 1/2 scale degree or so before it literally became the exact same series of notes, but just in a different order. That's why they're called modes of limited transposition. He also, and you can see them if you're curious. I think they're listed in here. Oh, nope, maybe they're not. Never mind. He also wrote with what we were calling non-retrogradable rhythms. Rhythms that you can't. he would write without time signatures as well as without key signatures. And some of those measures that you heard, that you could kind of identify, well, there is a pulse here, but it's really wonky, like it's not fitting into a set groove. That's because of this rhythmic intentionality that he had with these non-retrogradable rhythms. He was also really inspired by Hindu music, music from Eastern cultures, and they had just a whole other different concept of what keys are and what a rhythmic basis is. And so you hear these things coming into his music. It's fascinating. The other really important thing you should know about Messian, which you can kind of see on this picture over here, is that he was an ornithologist. Does anybody know what ornithologist means? Yeah. He loved birds. He studied them. He was a bit of a hermit, a bit of an odd duck. And he would just take a clipboard. I showed them the picture of him with the clipboard. And he would just take a clipboard of staff paper and walk into the forest and notate bird calls and then use them in his music. And so often in his scores, you'll see a reference to a little bird song and the specific species of bird that it's referencing in the score, which I think is really cool. I was also really into birds when I was younger, especially around middle school. I was like a member of the Audubon Society. I was a kind of nerdy kid. if you couldn't tell. And I would like obsess over migratory patterns, and I would lead people out into bird watching trips and that sort of thing, and birds were very important to me as well, growing up in Central Florida. And it was just really cool to also know that this composer, who I connected so profoundly with in my studies, was also really interested in birds. Fast forward a bunch of years later, I'm in Paris on another organ pilgrimage. We are going to Messiaen's church, the Church of Sainte Trinité, in Paris, and we are having a master class with John Gillick, who is kind of the world expert in all things Messiaen. Our session was from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. That night, which is the time that we got. So that's what we took. And it was me and a group of about 10 organ majors and sacred music majors from the school I attended in Pittsburgh called Duquesne. And this church had these sort of black steeples, and it was kind of in the red light district of Paris. If any of you have been there, it was right next to Moulin Rouge. Not next to, it was down the street from Moulin Rouge. And it was just very spooky in a number of ways. We had to crawl up, as you can imagine, in these old European cathedrals, a gajillion stairs on one of these tiny little spiral staircases. You just go up and up and up and up and up, and then finally you reach the balcony where the organ is, right? I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of doing this, where you go up and up and up and up and finally get to the organ loft, but it's a lot more stairs than what we have here, I'll tell you that. And we finally get up to the balcony, and there's all these different rooms, and they're very dusty, and nothing has been cleaned. And Messiaen was a hermit, so I imagined him taking, naps in the balcony and just kind of hiding away from the press in these little nooks and crannies. And all of us took turns playing pieces by Messiaen for the world expert in all things Messiaen, and I stupidly played the hardest piece I had learned of Messiaen's, and was just eviscerated for it. Was a torturous thing, but it was really amazing. And we're in this place, and all the lights are off except for the lights in the balcony. And while other students are performing for John Gillick, I'm wandering the halls, just taking it all in. And I'm wondering about Messiaen's life, and I'm also wondering if he ever took the sounds of any street birds, any sort of birds that you would find just outside the walls of the church, and incorporate them into his music, because that would have been pretty cool too. And I'm thinking about all of the people who might have sat in these very pews listening to him, and who were transformed by his music. It was not the best organ in Paris by no stretch of the imagination, and he definitely could have had, well, this is a contentious opinion, but perhaps a better instrument to play, but he felt very spiritually connected to this one place. So he stayed there for his entire life and played the organ there. Finally, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it is time to go home to our hotels and sleep. And we are exhausted beyond belief, because we have just played very hard pieces of music for this world expert, and all of us are shaking in our boots and sleepless in a number of ways. And so we crawl down all of these stairs, and it takes us quite a while to get out of the church. And as soon as we finally get out of the church, we're saying goodbye to Professor Gillick, and I realize something, and that something is that I have forgotten my organ shoes. I left them at the console. These organ shoes that we wear that have felt bottoms so that we can slide on the pedals, I have left them by Messiaen's organ console. And the only thing I can do is ask Professor Gillick, I am so sorry, but I forgot my organ shoes. They're still upstairs. Would you mind letting me grab them really quick? I'll be really fast. And he said, yes, of course. And so he opens the door, and I scramble up the stairs, and I suddenly realize that I am alone in Messiaen's church. And this is a powerful thing for me. All of the lights are off. I'm alone. I know exactly where my shoes are. I walk up to the organ console, and I bend down to pick up my shoes, and I notice something inside my organ shoes, and it was a feather. And I would be lying if I said I didn't have a bit of an emotional moment at that time, very late that one evening. I have kept this feather. It is one of my most prized possessions, and I think it was some sort of message, should we say, from Messian, from the grave, and it just means a great deal to me. So I hope to share that with you all. Thank you again for letting me speak with you. I'm in the middle of Advent chaos, preparing for our Lessons and Carols concert, which I hope you come to. It's going to be a really, really beautiful service with underrepresented composers, all music written by people of color or women. Women also wrote music, if you didn't know that. But it's going to be really good. The choristers and the choir members have been working so hard on it. We also have Compline tonight at 9 o'clock. I have a group of 6 professional singers who sound absolutely magnificent. We rehearsed yesterday, and it is going to be so glorious. I hope you're able to come if you're night owls. Hopefully you're not that much of a night owl that you're at 2 o'clock in the morning in Messian's church, but some reasonable amount of night owlness. I hope you're able to make it. Are there any questions before we adjourn? I don't know what time it is or how long I've been speaking, but you're probably quite hungry, so yeah, I'll let you go. Yeah, Susan. Probably O Sacrum Convivium. O Sacrum Convivium, yeah, yeah. Oh no, of course, I love that piece. It's hard. It's hard. Any other questions, comments? Tomatoes? No? Thank you all for your time. Thanks for coming. Thank you.